You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome, everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It is Thursday, September 4th, 2025 at 7:37 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And I thought I would give a talk, a series of three talks, really, on the earthquake of abandonment terror and the tsunami of terrible sadness, as I like to call it. The earthquake of abandonment terror is the activation of the attachment system, the abandonment anxiety that triggers that. And then the tsunami of terrible sadness is the reaction that we get into when we come out of that fearfulness and see how that fearfulness affects the way that we respond to ourselves and to the world. And each of the different detachment strategies has a different orientation in terms of the experience of both the abandonment terror and also the sadness that comes from that. Everybody is driven by abandonment terror. That's the great central human experience. In childhood, of course, abandonment is equivalent to death, which makes the experience, or can make the experience quite terrifying. And then there's a biological response to that, which moves very quickly into tantrum mode. If you've ever been around small children and they want to be picked up, they just go like this. They just put their arms up as a signal that they should then be picked up. And if nobody picks them up, then they get confused. They've made the signal and nothing's happened, and then the body responds with pain, and so they whimper. Have you ever been at a big birthday party for small kids or something, and the parents are just standing around talking, and all of a sudden one recognizes their kid's whimper in the cacophony of all of the noise, and they rush off to find their kid before they're lost into tantrum mode. But that whimper turns into intermittent crying, and that intermittent crying turns into continuous crying, and that continuous crying turns into tantrum mode. If you're too late and you don't get there until the kid is in full-blown tantrum mode, it takes 20 or 30 minutes to calm the kid down because of all of the chemicals that have been dumped into the system to activate the alarm. But then if nobody comes in tantrum mode, after a while, the kid will go into anaclytic depression where the whole system shuts down and they go into a preserving energy, preserving survival. The great ape, an infant who gets separated from its mother, a great ape child, baby's anticipated lifespan without the mother protecting it is around an hour. So you can see how intense the response is here. In our culture, maybe a little longer, but an infant can't survive really without that response from somebody. And so that drive where we really learn this, it has that intensity to it. If you let a child go over and over again into anaclytic depression, it changes the physical structure of their brain, which they never really recover from. And you can hear the description of that, which is where it's like a wall coming down, and they're just shutting down, and it's not volitional, and there's not much they can do about changing it. You'll notice if you look at YouTube videos of infants or small children in anaclytic depression, there's also a lot of physical stimming movements that come from it. So that earthquake, that movement into abandonment terror, which is signaling a need for physical proximity and protection from a caregiver, uh, trains also the brain. Human infants and children are, um, we are one of the species who are born with partially developed brains, not the fully developed brain. For instance, a great ape child is physically capable of holding on to its mother as the mother moves through the savannah, but a human infant can't even sit up. They can't even roll over. They don't have the physical strength for that. A great ape baby's brain is pretty much fully developed at birth, and our brains are not. The brain stem is developed, and the right hemisphere is partially developed, but the left brain is largely not developed. The evolutionarists have thought that that was so that the child could fit through the birth canal, but that's being vigorously refuted at the moment. We'll see who slugs it out and wins at the end. And they declare some other reason for it. But we develop a brain in response to the environment that we experience, which is quite different. If you're in utero and the whole process is complete, it's one thing. But if you are outside of that, then, and you're reactive to the environment, then it's what happens to you that affects the way that your brain develops. And then you have the brain that you grew up in a relationship to the environment. When you look at the development of emotional regulation and over the course of life, it's not until about 5 months or so that the brain is developed enough that you can actually recognize the people that are your specific caregivers. We call it stranger anxiety in this country, but in the UK they call it stranger danger, which I think is a better label. But a young infant, you can pass a young infant around, and the infant is pretty content to be on whoever's lap is holding them. But as soon as the brain develops to the point that they can recognize and develop a preference of caregiver, then all of a sudden, if they don't recognize somebody, they're frightened by them and they seek proximity to the person who will take care of them. That's the beginning of that attachment system activating, the beginning of the earthquake of abandonment, terror. And then you develop a hierarchy of attachment, figure preference. This is an interesting dilemma for traditional couples that raise children, because the child is going to prefer one parent over another for the first part of life. We have, in some ways, romanticized it to be the mother, but it isn't necessarily the mother. And the mother doesn't necessarily have to be female either in the constellation. It really is who the child prefers. And so if you have a traditional view about this and you don't allow the child to choose, that can also interfere. We have an 85% chance of inheriting the attachment strategy of our primary caregiver. So we're in some sense also choosing our attachment conditioning, because as each of the windows open for us to learn our attachment, we're likely to learn who we pick. We all start out as auto-regulators, so that internal way of dealing with things. And then if somebody comes regularly enough that we can rely on them, we begin to reorient toward an external regulator. And if that external regulator is reliable enough that we can begin to collaborate with them, we begin to learn to regulate ourselves in a collaborative way. We learn to recognize that we have an agenda and they have an agenda. And we learn to collaborate on satisfying those agendas. And as we learn to master our own emotional regulation, we develop a collaborative regulation system where we can regulate ourselves. But if we get into trouble, we can turn to somebody who will reliably regulate us. In the development of preoccupied attachment, the caregiver comes reliably enough that we move away from auto-regulating into depending on someone else. But they don't come reliably enough that we develop self-mastery and the capacity to regulate ourselves independent of them. We become reliant on them for emotional regulation. That's what happens to us. And then the brain develops a structure around that. So quick arousal and activation of the amygdala and a slow to settle. So hypoactivation of the hippocampus, which would then have a regulating influence. That means we're dependent on physical proximity to our regulator in order to feel emotionally regulated. If you require proximity to emotionally regulate, that means when your exploration system activates, you can't pursue exploration without separating. So it acts as an inhibitor to the development of exploration in people who have preoccupation because they're dependent on the physical proximity of their regulator to feel regulated. They begin to separate from their regulator, and that activates the attachment system, which compels them to seek proximity. And so it interferes with their capacity to explore. The other thing that often happens is that the regulator, the parent, the attachment figure is dependent on the child for regulation as well. And so they, should the child wish to separate from the caregiver becomes dysregulated at the separation. That's the problem with preoccupation. If you lose your regulator, you become dysregulated, which causes you to seek proximity to the regulator. And if you count on the child to be your regulator, the proximity to the child to be your regulator, as soon as they attempt to separate from you to pursue the development of their exploration, you become dysregulated. And so that you can interfere then with the child's capacity to explore. Is that all making sense so far? In organized preoccupation, the strategy for maintaining proximity is helplessness. So you present yourself as helpless, even though you're not helpless, so that you can have the proximity of somebody helping you. In dismissing adults, their childhood is characterized by profound neglect. They don't get the responsiveness of the caregiver that's good enough to pull their attention into being externally regulated. The thing that prevents preoccupied children or anxious, ambivalent children from earning or developing security in childhood is the chaotic response of the caregiver in response to them. So they don't have the reliable care that would allow them to move into a collaborative relationship. They don't have patterns of expression that elicit reliably care. And so they don't develop monitoring particularly. Christian?
George, maybe this is like a kind of a false question, but I'm curious if you think that the like deficit in exploration for a preoccupied child might be more um them being limited from their kind of natural tendency to explore, or on the other hand, is it that the parents might not support their natural tendency to explore enough that they like kind of need support to encourage them to do that? Does that make sense the way that I frame that?
So the one aspect of the caregiver is limiting the exploration. That usually takes the form of overprotection. The caregivers presents it to the child as being frightened that the child might be injured in exploring. So they limit the exploration in that way. Or the caregiver is directing the child towards something that they think is valuable for the child, but may not line up with the interests of the child. Is that the second one?
Um, that might be a better framing. I guess what I was wondering is whether the child kind of needs initial support to start the exploration, and like there needs to be kind of a healthy push to do so, and that would be like kind of push, and if they have that, then they will explore, and then the other side would be kind of pulling the child back when they naturally want to explore. So kind of, I guess my question's about what the natural tendency of the child would be, and how they might rely on the caregiver.
Well, I think that the child would look to the caregiver for support and encouragement, and also look to the caregiver for instruction on how to respond to different circumstances as they arise. And so, often the way that the restrictions appear is that there's no encouragement, there's no support for a particular direction of exploration. If the caregiver isn't monitoring the child and isn't paying attention to the child in the way that preoccupied parents are chaotic and misattuned, the child might not understand actually what they're good at and what is of interest to them because they haven't been supported in the discovery of that. Is that making sense?
Yeah, so maybe kind of both are at work, and you couldn't really separate the
Well,
necessary push and the not pulling.
I was at a gathering of people, and uh, the grandmother was there, and she was interacting with her grandson. And she's kind of chased the grandson down because she wanted to hold the grandson, but he wanted to do something else. But she chased him down and picked him up and then put him on her lap. And then he wanted to get down, and she overpowered him and did not permit him to get down. That would be an example of the interference in exploration. And the child fussed and cried and wiggled and really pushed with everything they had to try and get down. And she overpowered them. And then you saw him settle. He gave up. That would be the instruction in preoccupation that he was receiving from the grandmother.
Okay.
So it can get, well, I mean, as forceful as a child can get, which is not that forceful, easily overpowered by an adult. But what you also notice, for instance, is a child, once they get past the blob stage and can self-locomote, they creep, they drag themselves along their belly. And then once they get up on all four, they begin to go, but they're very sensitive to proximity of the caregiver. And that's that moment of support and encouragement to go explore. And it takes the form of the child crawling 3 feet away and looking around to see if it's okay. And then they get the encouragement to go more. And then they crawl to the doorway and they look around and they get encouraged to do more. And then they crawl out and they crawl right back to make sure that you're still there. And you, as the caregiver, need to occupy that home base for the child. If the child were to crawl through the door and the caregiver would get up and leave, and then when the child crawled back, the caregiver was absent, that would frighten the child and inhibit the child from exploring. Then the more reliable the caregiver is, the greater the distance the child feels safe to explore. And then what the child does is something that they discover that they find fascinating and interesting. They come crawling back and they hand it off to the caregiver, and the caregiver is then attentive to looking at it and admiring it and inquiring of the child what it was about the thing that the child found interesting. That's the instruction in exploration, the instruction in what's interesting to the child, and indicating that to the child that it has value. But if the child comes crawling back and you're not there, then they tantrum, and you come back and they're holding the thing and they give it to you and you look at it and throw it away. The child also gathers a message from that, which is their exploration is important, and that they can't risk being separated from the caregiver because the caregiver is not reliable. And all of those things are the way that we're instructed in how to explore. I mean, in some sense, the dismissing child, where there's no attention to their coming and going, learns to be solitary in their exploration, that there's nobody who's interested in it, but there's also nobody interfering with it. Whereas with the preoccupied child, they're completely interfered with in terms of their capacity to explore. And given the choice between abandonment, that's abandonment terror, and exploring, they all abandon their exploration and seek to maintain proximity. But because the caregivers are typically so chaotic and they don't monitor the expressions, the attempt to get the attention of the caregiver, because there's no pattern for them to learn. If you had predictable caregivers, reliable caregivers, you would learn the pattern of requesting attention and receiving attention. And then when you wanted attention of a particular kind, you would make the gesture for that kind of attention, and you would likely receive it. But in the chaos of a disordered environment that is what the preoccupied child grows up in, there isn't a pattern for them to learn. And so what they need to do is iterate over and over again expressions for attention until they happen on the one that elicits a response. And so what you'll notice in preoccupied children is they just make a request for attention and a request for attention. Request for attention, did I get it? Yes, no. If I got it, then I engage it. If I didn't get it, I just throw up another request for attention. Of course, when you get older and you have more sophisticated strategies for that, what you'll notice is how it shows up conversationally. For instance, a preoccupied person will speak without leaving pauses for the other person to respond. In the normal back and forth of a conversation, you present a point and then you leave a space for the person to respond to you. But in the way that preoccupied people engage in conversation, they don't leave a gap because they want the attention to remain on them. There isn't a back and forth. There isn't a back and forth because the other person is so unreliable. They're likely not to be able to get the attention back when they want. And so once they get it, they have to keep it as long as they can. Another strategy that they use is to intentionally change the topic. So in a dynamic conversation where two people are interested in the same topic, each of you has the capacity to share something about the topic. But in a preoccupied mind, the letting the attention be drawn to someone else's experience as the abandonment terror. And so in order to regulate that experience of being abandoned over and over, and you have to hold on to the attention continuously. That means if the other person has something to say about the topic, you're likely to lose the attention. And so you begin to change the topic until you land on a topic that only you know something about, so that you're the only one who can talk about it. But what you don't notice is that because nobody else is interested in the topic, after a while, they're not interested in what you have to say about the topic. And so it still breaks down the conversation. Plus, people are outraged that you've violated the relevancy agreement. You haven't licensed that you're the only one who gets to hold the attention and talk about something. But because you're not monitoring their reactions, you're just spontaneously expressing, you miss all of that. And then you're in a state of confusion as to what went wrong because you haven't paid attention. Is that making sense? And all of that is driven by the anxiety, the abandonment anxiety. Authenticity is the ground of secure functioning. You express yourself authentically. The paradox of this, of course, is that it's not a big deal if you're securely attached to express yourself authentically. In fact, you never learn to lie, and you're not good at it. You've never really learned to manipulate because you've never had to. All you've ever had to do is ask for what you wanted. And so secure people ask for what they wanted, see whether they get it or not, and then they adjust. But if you didn't grow up in an environment that was responsive to you in that way, you learned very painfully to operate in relationships in a way that's inauthentic. But because who did?
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's fine.
Is there a thing about the parents who are pretending to take interest in the child because they care about the child? I mean, I see like these big reactions to the kids, and I know that they're not like genuine in that sense, but it makes the kid very happy. Is that enough?
To engage in a child and encourage the child in the way that the child needs to be encouraged is what you're supposed to do as a caregiver. The pedagogy of teaching is a complex topic, and the way that children are taught and are taught to learn is also tied up in the capitalist system and the capitalist economy. And when you say something like that to me, where my mind goes is a kind of anti-intellectualism, anti-expert stance that is one of the difficulties we have of the current system of education. The abundant overpraising that can happen is all a product of that. It really is, in some sense, meant as an antidote to the inequality of the distribution of educational resources in our culture. That's where my mind goes with that topic. The standardized testing and the very early channeling of kids into different um, channels for the development within our culture, and the compensation for the child who recognizes the inequality of the distribution system is a kind of placating of them. But that's probably not what you're asking.
I wasn't, but I just feel that it's having an opposite effect, even in adults, where the compliment on something starts to feel ingenuine from everybody, even though sometimes it is genuine, because there's a habit of exaggerating your reaction towards something. Like, wow, this is the best thing ever,
It's
like
awesome.
it's just a way to communicate in today's,
So
especially
then
through text.
it becomes transactional, perhaps, or trauma bonding. Most people don't operate on an authentic basis. If you look at the distribution of attachment, just as that as a model, 30% of people will be operating ordinarily in an authentic way, and everybody else will be using some form of inauthenticity to navigate.
I still don't agree with that statistic, but
Why?
it just doesn't feel like that, just being in the world and meeting so many people everywhere.
So you think that the 30% is too high or too low?
Hi.
Somebody more pessimistic than me.
I mean,
Yeah, it's awesome.
maybe it was different 30 years ago when this happened, the study happened, but
Oh, no, I think that what really happens is that because the skill set of secure functioning is so much more robust, that if you don't have the complete set, the people that do don't engage so much. And so it is true that the appearance of the world is very different. I was talking to Les earlier about working in rehab for 12 years. And I can tell you when I describe secure people, the reaction from the people in the rehab was, they don't exist. I've never met one. What are you kidding me? That's a unicorn. You're describing a unicorn. So that your capacity to be in relationship with somebody who could do that, if you're not also secure, is going to be limited. And so you're going to have limited experience of it. I would make a case for that. Until you're really willing to be collaborative in exchanging care in a relationship, you're not going to be with people who can, because they won't do it. And they don't make a big deal about it. They just don't engage because you don't meet the basic requirements.
not just that, but also like getting slightly triggered by them, and I'm like, why I should be open to them, but I don't know what's happening, that there's a
Well, people on the avoidance side of things would feel intruded upon by those demands, and that it was, an unfair request, and so there would be some withdrawal from that. Also, the suppression of emotion on the avoidance side makes it hard to understand what's being communicated. And in the typical way that everything is cognitively communicated to avoidant people, that would be problematic for them. They would be thinking, it's perfectly obvious I've been communicating all of this in the full range of text, meta communication, body language, facial expressions, all of that stuff that isn't really tracked by avoidant people. So they would feel a frustration that it was hard to communicate. Is that making sense? The dilemma for preoccupied people, though, is different than that. It's the child experiences the repetition of the demand for attention when they get the attention that they want as having been successful in eliciting the attention. But that isn't typically the caregiver experience. The caregiver experience is, I'm attending to my child now in a way that I think is what I should do to be a good caregiver. And when they line up with the child's needs, the child has the experience that they've elicited the care that they want. And when they don't line up with the child's needs, the child feels misattuned to it and unseen. But the parent is never having the experience of the child eliciting from them a particular type of care because they don't track that. It's just when it corresponds that the child has that experience. Is that making sense? So when the child thinks to themselves, if I just get it right, I'm going to be able to get the care that I want, that's not true. They don't really have much say in when they get care and when they don't, or what kind of care that they get. But it is the thing that fuels their belief that there's something wrong with them, that they can't do it. If I could just figure this out, if I could just get it right, then I would be able to elicit the care that I want. That leads to the sense of helplessness that they tend to operate under. They're completely helpless to elicit the response that they want from their caregiver. Not because they don't try, but because the caregiver is not responsive. The caregiver doesn't pay attention. Is that making sense? The reason I'm pointing that out is because the terrible sadness that preoccupied people feel as they come out of the preoccupation is linked to the delusion that they had something to do with the chaotic care that they received. And that when you begin to recognize that all of the opportunities that you missed and all of the focus and attention that you put on trying to figure out how to elicit a response from a caregiver was a misunderstanding of what was happening, and that you could have done something else, i.e., you could have expressed yourself authentically all the way along and had a better chance at getting the care that you wanted. This is particularly true when you move outside of the narrow nuclear family system into a broader group. Of course, you're reiterating, you're pretending to be who you think that they want you to be in order to elicit the care that you need. And as you move out of the family home into the wider environment, and you continue to do that in an attempt to elicit the care that you want, when you really see that actually, if I had expressed myself authentically, I would have been much more likely to get the care that I wanted and in a much more reliable fashion than the pretending and the constantly performing the thing that I think you want, in the becoming of who I think you want me to be in order to get the care. You are slammed with the tsunami of terrible sadness that you actually abandoned yourself in the attempt to get somebody else to be interested in you. And that had you been willing to present yourself authentically, things would have gone better. Is that making sense? And it is a terrible sadness to recognize that you are the one who abandoned yourself long after the time when you needed to. Would it?
George, are you using the interchangeably saying being interested in them versus getting the care that they need, the same thing?
No, not necessarily. You need a specific type of care, a specific type of response is one thing. But we all want people to be able to see us and in seeing us have an effect on them, having our exchange with them having an effect on them. One of the things that happens when you pretend to be someone else is that you really are in a state of deprivation, that the authentic you is unseen, of course, and has no effect really on the other person. So that infant expression is you express yourself in that authentic, spontaneous way that infants express. The caregiver sensitively attunes to you, they empathetically connects to you, they understand what that expression means, and then they take care of you. And that taking care of you is the thing that reassures you that you've been seen and understood, but also are worthy of a response from somebody else. And in insecure and disorganized family system, that cycle doesn't really complete. You make the gesture as a preoccupied person, and sometimes you get a response and sometimes you don't get a response, and that leads to a self-esteem of you don't really matter. Your needs don't really matter. Sometimes they take care of you and sometimes you don't, and you can't figure out why they don't. So there must be something wrong with you for them not to be responsive. That's where that understanding of you is, your self-understanding of you. And then because you think there's something wrong with you, you don't lead with your authentic expression. You intuit from them what you think they want you to be, and then you pretend to be that so that you can get a response from them. But even if you do get a response from them when you're pretending to be somebody else, it doesn't satisfy that authentic need. So you get mad at them. You're mad at them for not responding to you, even though you didn't tell them, right? That's the conundrum. It's
Or
hard.
you did tell them, but you're not acting authentically.
You did. And that's the source of the terrible sadness. When you recognize that the reason they didn't attend to you in the way that you needed is because you didn't tell them who you were. And you didn't tell them who you were because you didn't think that if you did, that they would respond to you. And there you are in the self-abandonment, the terrible sadness of that. And then also there you are in the terror of being authentic, because you have a lifetime of the experience of inauthenticity getting everything for you. How do you abandon the inauthenticity to attempt to be authentic when authenticity has never worked? And also you've developed this false self that's really dynamic and amazing at this iteration of need, and you've not attended to your authentic self, and it's kind of a klutz. It doesn't really know what's happening. They can't really do it. And so you have the highly developed false self that is good at getting things, and you have the authentic self that isn't even good at expressing itself. That's the dilemma.
So this translates to adults as well, right? I know you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, we learn it in childhood, and then we don't. And that there wasn't much choice in childhood. You didn't really have a choice about what to do. But when you hit adolescence and your cognitive mind improved, you could have done differently. When you moved outside of the nuclear family system into the larger family system, you could have done something differently. This is how it's going to appear in the mind. And all that time went by where I was not myself. So making the decision to be authentic and then attempting to pull the fear, the abandonment here below the threshold for authentic expression is the work. So in Ideal Parent Figure Protocol, the work is really on the fearfulness and the attention of the ideal parent figures to your authentic expression. And then the ideal parent figures listening until you've expressed everything you want to express. So that whole expanse of impenetrable languaging, 20, 30-minute rants without pause, without interruption, just the hearing of it. And then also to develop the mentalizing capacity. And then also to develop the capacity to explore. There's a lot to do to repair preoccupation. One of the good things about highly preoccupied people is they haven't explored at all, really. So you could do anything and begin the adventure of exploring. And with that discernment, is this meaningful to me? Is this not meaningful to me? And moving in the direction of the things that are more meaningful. Would you like to do some meditation? You're trying horse riding? Wonderful.
Why not?
Exactly. I could go into a whole vegan spiel about why not, but I'll leave it out. But I applaud the exploration and I love horses. So there. Would you like to do ideal parent figure, Vipassana, or Metta? Vipassana? Vipassana? All right. So go ahead and settle in, closing your eyes, scanning through the body, looking for any tension you might be holding, seeing if you can release it. Okay, let go of the meditation. How's that? So tomorrow, Friday, I'm doing the how to date like a secure person, even if you're not secure yet, workshop at 7:30. What is that? It says 7:30 here. Might look at the website, see what that is. Workshops, here we are. It's actually 7 to 8:30 is what I thought. So it's wrong. And it's actually 7 to 8:15 is what really is happening. But anyway. And then on Saturday, the 13th, I'm starting a level 1 for 3 Saturdays. That's from 9 to 1. Let's see what else. I have a meditation and addiction level 2 class starting on September 15th. That's Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 6 to 7 Pacific time. And we'll do a deep dive into our 4 modules around addiction. And take a look at that. On the 19th, I also have an meditation and attachment workshop, which is talking about the level 2 program that's coming up. We have a meditation and attachment level 2 class, which is starting on October 21st on Tuesday afternoon from 4:30 to 6:30. Then, let's see. I have on November 7th, a workshop discussing the certification program that we have for people who want to train in our meditation and addiction and meditation and attachment classes, which is facilitating ideal parent figure protocol and also using the meditations. On November 15th, I have our annual workshop we call Family Archaeology, which is preparing you to go home for Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's, treating your adventure home as a dive into understanding what the hell happened. So that's what's coming up. Anyway, it's up on the website. Take a look. Really appreciate your practice. Glad to see you. I offer the teaching freely, but I do hope if you're a resource that can make a donation, you'll consider doing it. There's a link on the website. It helps support me and also the work Mettagroup is doing. And I hope to see you soon on the path. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, George.